By the time the frost started creeping into the dirt like pale fingers, she was already 8 months pregnant and entirely alone, standing in a stretch of wilderness. So vast it felt like the world had forgotten her name, and maybe it had, because there was no one left who spoke it with kindness anymore. Her husband had died months earlier from a fever that burned through him faster than she could pray, and when his family turned their backs on her, swollen belly and whispered accusations they could never prove, she walked away with nothing but a threadbare coat, a rusted hatchet, and the life growing inside her. And she kept walking until the road disappeared and the mountains rose like silent judges around her. And that was where she stopped, not because she wanted to, but because her body could go no farther. The first night she slept under an overturned pine, snow melting into her hair, whispering promises she didn't believe. And when morning came, she understood. Something simple and terrifying. No one was coming to save her. So she began to build, dragging fallen logs with hands that shook from hunger and cold, stacking them into a crooked shelter that leaned more than it stood, each log a prayer, each breath a bargain with God that she would survive just one more day. Her back screamed, her ankles swelled, and sometimes she had to stop because the child inside, her kicked so hard it stole her breath. But she talked to the baby as she worked, telling it stories of warmth and bread and laughter, even though she hadn't tasted a full meal in weeks. Wolves howled at night, and once she woke to find bear tracks pressed into the snow just steps from her shelter, and she cried then quietly, not from fear but from exhaustion, because fear had become a luxury she couldn't afford. The shelter took 5 days to finish, 5 days of bleeding palms and aching bones, and when it was done, it barely blocked the wind, but it was hers. Built by a woman the world had decided didn't matter anymore. And on the 6th night, as she huddled inside wrapped in rags, she heard footsteps that were not animal and not wind, slow and deliberate, stopping just outside her shelter, and her heart pounded so hard she thought the baby might feel it. And when a shadow fell across the doorway, she grabbed the hatchet with trembling hands, ready to defend a life she hadn't even met yet. And then a voice spoke, low, calm, rough with years of solitude, and it said, "Easy, I ain't here to hurt you." And when she looked up, she saw him, tall and broad, wrapped in furs stitched by hand, beard thick with frost, eyes sharp but not cruel, a mountain man who looked like he'd stepped out of the wilderness itself. And for a long moment neither of them spoke, until he looked at her belly, then at the shelter, then back at her face, and said words she didn't know she'd been waiting her entire life to hear. "You shouldn't be alone out here, and you ain't." And something inside her broke, not fear, not pain, but the wall she'd built around her heart to survive, and she cried in front of a stranger because, for the first time in months, she believed she might live. The mountain man's name was Elias, and he had lived alone so long that silence followed him like a second shadow. But that night he built her a fire without asking, reinforced her shelter with logs cut cleaner and straighter than hers, and cooked stew so rich she cried again when she tasted it, because she had forgotten food could feel like kindness. He never touched her without permission, never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. And when the storms came, and they came hard, with snow that swallowed sound and cold that cracked wood, he stayed, hunting at dawn, repairing at dusk, speaking softly to the child growing inside her as if it were already part of his world. Weeks passed. Then one terrible night the pains began, fierce and unforgiving, and fear returned with claws. But Elias did not panic, did not leave, did not hesitate. He boiled water, tore cloth, held her hand while she screamed into the storm. And when the child finally cried, raw and alive, Elias turned away so she wouldn't see tears freezing into his beard. They named the baby Hope, because that was what she had been from the start. And when spring finally broke through the snow, the shelter was no longer just a refuge, but a home, strengthened by hands that chose to stay. Elias taught her to trap, to fish, to read the sky, and she taught him to laugh again, softly at first, then freely. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the mountains gold, Elias looked at her, not as someone broken, not as a burden, but as a woman who had built her own survival from fallen logs while carrying life inside her. And he said, "I told you once you weren't alone." And I meant it. And in that moment she understood that strength is not loud. Love does not always arrive on time. And sometimes the harshest wilderness gives birth to the safest home. And if this story moved you, if you believe in quiet strength, second chances, and hope born in the coldest places, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more powerful stories like this are waiting. Stories about survival, courage, and the unexpected kindness that changes lives forever.